I remember a time that I just could not get it right. I'd been working on a report, and I had to give it, and it just wasn't getting there. No matter what I said, no matter how I said it, no matter what I wore, it just wouldn't work. I couldn't get it to happen. And I started worrying, is this going to haunt me forever? Is this just going to be my life now? Or will people just forget? Guys, 5th grade was hard. It's a lot going on. I was preparing a book report, about Dr. King. It was one of those 30-page or so books, very in-depth. It had been edited, I think. And I planned for the presentation to take the end of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech and deliver it to my class. I practiced the speech, but there was just something missing. What did I need? What was it that would make the words more impactful? And then it came to me, a soundtrack. So I grabbed my tape recorder, remember tape, and I hummed the tune to We Shall Overcome long enough into the recorder for it to span the length of the speech, because we just learned the song in music class. And delivering the speech with accompaniment made a difference. It felt more powerful, more impactful. So on the morning of the presentation, I put on my blazer for school. I gathered up my tape player and my copy of the speech, and then when it was a time for the presentation, I sat in front of the class with my friends all arranged around me, kind of like this. And I started the tape player, and when my own humming voice started, I intoned the words, I have a dream. There's a lot of drama in my life as a kid. And I still remember the quiet in the room, though. That expectant face of my friends who knew the music and probably the blazer was telling them that something important was coming next. And music can do that, as we heard. It has that power. And for a long time, some of you will remember this. The way we learned that new music was coming out, music you had to go to a record store to buy, was with actual live television performances of songs. And one of the most famous premieres of any song came in 1964. Now, 1964 was the year that the first Mustang rolled off the line. To give you an idea of what's happening then, it was the year that Liz Taylor married Richard Burton for the first time. Oh, Liz. And 1964 was the year a 35-year-old Dr. Martin Luther King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and the Civil Rights Act was signed in law. 35. And can you just hear the music knowing those things of that time? On the first night in February 1964, the sound stage at The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was loaded up with a full orchestra, strings and all, and Sam Cooke performed live for the first time anywhere, A Change Is Gonna Come. He wrote the song after an experience in Shreveport, Louisiana, where he was refused lodging in the town where he was the headlining act. And then he was arrested for very understandable disturbing the peace. But as hard as that experience was, writing that song about it was easy. He explained in an interview that, in fact, he had never had a song that was that easy to write. He felt as if it was a complete song just hanging out there, and he reached out and took it. In fact, the song came so easily to him that he worried he might have actually taken it from somebody else. So he was calling his friends and singing it to them and sending out samples to people. But all his friends said they'd never heard it before. And it was a masterpiece. It became an indispensable part of the civil rights era. Cook's song became part of its accompaniment, its soundtrack. And a year after the song premiered 1,000 miles south in Selma, when voting rights activists announced 3 marches along the 54-mile stretch from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, so many believed that a change would really come. The first march was on Sunday, March 7th. And as the marchers left Selma and began to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, more than 600 of the marchers, they were beaten by state troopers, ending that march in brutality, violence, and bloodshed, and that was Bloody Sunday. 2 days later, Martin Luther King Jr. came to Selma. So did the hundreds of clergy from all over the country that he invited to be there beside him. King planned to lead the second march personally. And all his supporters, all of the organizers, and all his followers were ready for whatever the state troopers planned to do that day. Everyone on that march had seen the stories, heard the tales of Bloody Sunday, and many had seen the faces of their friends even who were there. And knowing this, everyone on that second march was prepared to stay together no matter what. And Dr. King came to that bridge on this march now, 2,000 in his company this time. And he looked across an expanse no longer than a football field at the seething assembly of troopers on the other side. And he knelt down and he prayed and he sang. He sang, "We shall overcome." And then he got up from the ground where his companions were terrorized just 2 days before. He turned his back to that seething horde of troopers on the other end of the bridge. And what did he do? He walked away. Yeah. But the bloodshed wasn't over, friends. A few years ago, 2 children of the South, 2 investigative journalists, Andrew Beck, Grace, and Chip Brantley, who were both from Alabama, they produced a chilling investigative podcast called White Lies. It's distributed by National Public Radio. They investigated what happened in Selma over the days following Dr. King's retreat from the bridge that day. If you haven't listened to the podcast, please do. Hearing 2 people so singularly dedicated to uncovering the truth about events that transpired more than a half century ago gives someone hope. And if you don't know what a podcast is, there is hope for you too. Just look for someone to help you out if you don't know what it is. And as much as I'd love to, I can't give away the ending. It's a mystery. But the podcast begins with the host taking us back to the night of March 9th, 1965, 2 days after Bloody Sunday. Reverend James Reeb, a young Unitarian minister, had responded to Dr. King's call to ministers across the country to come to the aid of those who seek justice for voting rights in Alabama. After Reeb marched to the Edmund Pettus Bridge that day with 2,000 others only to turn around with his company, and after Reeb had met up with 2 colleagues for some dinner before a rally at a church nearby to plan the next march with Dr. King, the ministers ate at Walker's Cafe. Walker's Cafe was a Black-owned restaurant because white people advocating for voting rights in Selma were not welcome many places. And when the 3 ministers left the cafe, they were confronted by 4 Klansmen and beaten savagely. James Reeb was beaten so badly he needed to be transported to Birmingham for surgery 2 hours away. But after the surgery was not successful, he was placed on life support and he died. In her autobiography, Coretta Scott King tells this story about Reeb's memorial. Her words: on Monday, March 15, 2,000 people joined in a memorial service for James Reeb at the courthouse in Selma in what was perhaps the greatest and most inspiring ecumenical service ever held. Archbishop Iakovos, primate of the Greek Orthodox Church in North and South America, conducted the memorial service from the courthouse steps. Martin spoke the eulogy in which he asked, "Why must good men die for good?" and answered, "James Reeb's death may cause the white South to come to terms with its conscience." Then Martin laid a wreath in James Reeb's memory at the courthouse door. Later that same night, President Johnson addressed the nation saying, I quote, "Our mission is at once the oldest and most basic of this country, to right wrong, to do justice, to serve man." He went on in his address to say that it is all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and we shall overcome. We shall overcome. It was 1989 when I did my book report. When I trotted out my tape player I'd hummed so mightily into to set the mood. And it was Mrs. Winkfield, my 5th grade teacher, a woman of color in her mid to late 40s, likely in college when Dr. King's work in Selma made the news, who stood and watched me speak to her children. And it was Mrs. Winkfield who held her hands together like this over her mouth. I don't know what she was thinking. It might have been, who let this child do this in that blazer? No. But I thought I saw her holding back a tear, actually, as one of her children told a story to all children about being judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, and children of all colors playing hand in hand. It's easy standing here looking out at you, children of all ages, who I know want nothing more than freedom and equity for all, to know some small measure of what Mrs. Winkfield maybe was hoping for. Because this place, I've seen, nurtures some of the most thoughtful, kind, and brilliant young people I think I've ever had the honor to meet. And every kindness, every act of thoughtfulness of a child makes me grateful for their parents and their wider community here, who help to guide those children to kindness and understanding. It's enough to make you wonder if we really will change the world. Because the awe at seeing whole generations change their way of thinking is like the awe the earth gives us at seeing a small, ancient mountain stream roll down a rock face, gather speed and power until it can carve continents into fertile valleys. This place holds among its guiding principles the active dismantling of systems of racism and oppression, and I know that every act of justice-seeking, of radical welcome, of changing the very ways we think and act, are ways that we are living into Dr. King's call to do more than just hope, more than just have faith, more than just merely pray, but rather to give others hope, to restore others' faith, to answer each other's prayers by doing the hard work of developing a truly anti-racist identity and future blessed with equity. The awe at feeling the change in a place that does this work boldly and fearlessly is like the awe that comes from watching a timeless river smooth the jagged rocks at its riverbed. And in a time when the very nature of reality, of truth, of objective fact is challenged, the last full measure of Dr. King's message of devotion, messages he intoned at last against unjust war and its impact on the most vulnerable, against wealth inequality, against systemic racism, messages intentionally forgotten, edited out by those who speak, who try to make Dr. King into some convenient saint, some peaceful prophet who spoke only about the content of character. This intentional forgetting, which goes by another name, ignorance, this ignorance is trying to put Dr. King in his place. But not here, friends. Not together. We won't have that. Never before has it been more important to recognize the truth at the heart, his message that so many still hope to hide, that the horrors so many face so often flow directly from foundational white supremacy culture of a nation that reaps and reaps and reaps the benefits of that culture. And since its founding 4 centuries ago, that river's been running ever since. And so it's fitting that those investigators into the night of James Reeb's death discovered, among hundreds of other facts, that the song playing on the jukebox when James Reeb left Walker's Cafe, the last thing James heard before he was killed by avowed white supremacists, was Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come." It's one thing, friends, to build a life worth living. It's another entirely to live a life worth giving. Over and over, King spoke truth to power, power that he would not stop, even if it meant his mortal life. And James Reeb, a true accomplice, was ready to put his body between a billy club and his friends along the Edmund Pettus Bridge by day, and so lost his mortal life by night. And both of these lives, these co-workers for freedom, changed the course of history for a nation. Now, I've seen how people have been disagreeing lately in news, around us, at the gas station, wherever. Sometimes a bill that we see coming up in Congress is just too mean. Sometimes a comment stings just too much. And it strains my compassion for the dark, suspicious, and cynical minds that dwell yet in ignorance. And when I am lost on my way to compassion, when I cannot discern which way to go, I remember Dr. King on that bridge, pausing, discerning. And discernment reminds me when I do that compassion shares its root with the word accomplice, with the word accompaniment, with the word companion. It's been a long time coming. But is there any bridge too far to approach as an accomplice. It's been a long time coming, but is there any song too hard for us to join into and accompany? It's been a long time coming, but is there any heart too broken that could not be helped, could not be held, could not be healed by true compassion, friends? In answering these questions, we have made a start together. And when we lose our way, and we will, waking in this world that still bears the ravages of systemic racism and unmerited privilege, when it seems it's a bridge too far, remember, we have a dream, friends, a dream we can almost reach out and touch at times. A dream as close as the children we build this world to hold with worth and dignity. A dream of a life worth more than living. A life worth giving. Of this we dream, friends. And may that dream at last come true, because it has been a long time coming. May it ever be so. Blessings to you on this sacred day, and amen.